Do you think that for the first test against the Wallabies, we should just pencil in now Wallabies score the first try?
Clunky again, albeit sort of with the flashes of quality that we've come to expect from this Lions crop.
He's already captained the Lions for a game on this tour, but as a willing deputy to Maro Itoje, he really stepped up. I mean, he was phenomenal in this game.
I was watching on L'Equipe TV and the commentator went, "Oh la la, quel magician," about Finn Russell, which was lovely.
I was generally going to say, who's the leader in Mickey's clubhouse?
Big injury cloud at 15 with Blair Kinghorn, so yeah, lots to get into.
Go.compare, proud sponsors of the Welsh Rugby Union, are delighted to power the Telegraph Rugby Podcast this summer. Go.compare is here to support fans on their journey to satisfying insurance. Whether you're looking for the right cover for your car, home or travel plans, get peace of mind knowing you've got an expert by your side every step of the way. So, stop overpaying and start comparing with Go.compare.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. We have just witnessed Lions 36, Brumbies 24, but do not be alarmed, it's not just me in the studio. Well, actually it is just me in the studio, but we will be scrambling around to try to get as many people on the podcast as possible. We've got Charlie Morgan joining us from Disneyland, from of all places. We've got Gavin Mairs in Canberra, and don't worry if you don't see Charles Richardson here. He is travelling around Argentina at the moment. We will catch up with him another day. But without further ado, let's crack on. Well, through the miracle of technology, we are joined all the way from Disneyland by Charlie Morgan. I could insert all sorts of goofy jokes in here, but Charlie Morgan, straight away, Lions match has just finished. What did you make of that one?
Yeah, genuinely not a gag. Straight from Disneyland, indeed. Clunky again, albeit sort of with the flashes of quality that we've come to expect from this Lions crop. Some clues to the test match lineups, I guess, in good and bad ways, i.e. 9 and 10 look really slick. Other positions kind of less and less clear with that test series coming up, coming ever closer, and then a sort of big injury cloud at 15 with Blair Kinghorn. So yeah, lots to get into.
Do you think that for the first test against the Wallabies, we should just pencil in now Wallabies score the first try?
The slow starts have obviously been a theme, and even when they scored early and sort of made a bit of a statement against the Western Force, they were immediately under the pump because of those darned restarts. So they're kind of compounding errors in and falling short in these sort of restarts and areas where you'd expect that cohesion being knitted together. So yeah, I guess so. Wallabies will certainly be going for a fast start. Today it was really avoidable. Again, a box kick going up that looked reasonably harmless, and Blair Kinghorn took it anyway, but Dan Sheehan with one of those obstruction penalties that have become more and more common with the escorting crackdown. So yeah, an avoidable one this time, and something that Joe Schmidt will be licking his lips at.
Well, there was actually shots of Joe Schmidt in the crowd, and he had a big old grin painted on his face. They showed him in the first 10 minutes of that game, and he genuinely looked so pleased with himself, like so happy. I imagine there was loads of it for him to pick up on that one. You mentioned there sort of compounding those errors, missing balls in the air. I'd suggest that maybe try to get the ball down on the grass might be something worth looking at as well. Was it 3 times they were held up over the line in this game? That's got to be infuriating.
Yeah, more. I was on player ratings duty, and the only sort of hitch, and it's obviously it's not entirely down to him, that I could think of from Maro Itoje's performance, was just being a little bit tidier, making those more gains count when they're well set up, and when that drive is eking out impetus, they should really be able to hurt teams, and just maybe, and that's been a theme, hasn't it? Thinking of Bundyaki getting held up, I think against the Reds, when it seemed more easier to score. Chessum was a bit upright for his right at the death. James Lowe's was the big gaff. That was really odd. It's just sort of him cutting back inside, and Muirhead's a tough customer and did really well. But yeah, but those are the things that if you take those into account, maybe the performance was a little bit more impressive as a whole. If you think that they're being blighted by errors like that can be a sort of bit of an aberration.
Well, there's a couple of things that I think Andy Farrell can hang his hat on right now. I think they'll be second match in a row, I think they'll be dead pleased with the set piece. I think scrum looked great, Lineout looked really good. In fact, I think it's notable that I think I saw someone said, well, look what happens when you play 3 locks, is that the Lineout functioned really, really well. And they had this one move where it was the front jumper skips out and then it goes to Maro Itoje. They did that a couple of times and it just looked really slick and looks like it's finally working. Dan Sheehan being at the peak of his powers also helps with that. And then the other thing is it felt disjointed, and then suddenly Bundyaki straightens and everything comes into focus. It just feels like when that happens and they've got good go forward ball, that everything just suddenly makes a lot more sense. Gary Ringrose, I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit when we do our ups and downs, but fantastic display from him. Bearing that in mind, Charlie, the breakdown, particularly in the wide channels, has got to be something that's still a major concern, but also go forwards, because with the exception of some players, it didn't feel like they had that massive go forward ball that we've been saying that they need in order to earn the right to go wide.
I wonder whether the how wide they've been going has been a bit of a rope-a-dope for Schmidt, and that they're going to be super direct.
Now, this is the second time in a row that you've suggested that there's sort of dummy plays being put out there for Joe Schmidt's benefit.
Only because I don't think I think it's such an easy thing to identify for any pro team, for any team really, for that way down the levels, when you're going wide without earning the right to go wide, don't you? And I think at any level, the importance of punching up to create space out wider to narrow the defence. And actually, after the Lions scored their first try, they went through a real sequence where Gibson Park was just humming around the fringes, and that was sort of when you saw Joe McCarthy most prominent. And they've got those. We've spoken about their lack of punch, and maybe they don't have the big sort of bulldozing number 8. But with Conan, when he's allied to someone like Genge, someone like McCarthy, they do have those big bodies there, and they can do it. And I would expect them to be far more direct. They're going to have to be far more direct when the tests come around, because you're right. That's sort of just an easy way for a defense to mop up and attack these days, is to go hard, flood those breakdowns. Not even just with that initial jackler, but by smashing through on counter. And actually, the Lions won a really important turnover through that. It was I think it was Gary Ringrose. Gary Ringrose went low. Freeman was over the ball as he was throughout the game, really, and Conan and Chessum cleaned up to win a really good turnover there. So, yeah, I would expect them to tighten up. And Bundyacki's performance, again, it was just one of those where when he was almost, the less he was thinking about bringing other players into the game, and more he was thinking about his USP, which is just being fantastic at sort of little bit of footwork, getting over the gain line and creating impetus from there. That just looked better when that was happening with more simplification.
Tell you what, you mentioned there, or you hinted at there, the idea of sort of bringing in test match behaviours. One of those that crept in today, and I was like, oh, okay, is when Finn Russell opted to take a kick at poles from a penalty that was in a position where they could have had a scrum.
Yep. Yeah. Another one was when he dropped back into the pocket and plugged a corner, and that was going to be one of the first bit of French commentary that was really, really nice. Actually, was a guy I was watching on L'Equipe TV, and the commentator went, "Oh la la, quel magician," about Finn Russell, which was lovely. And then the second bit was Henry Pollock, ding ding ding, klaxon. He made a little burst out wide. He was called Incroyable, so that was lovely. But yeah, you're right. Test match behaviors, and those two, the 9 and 10. Although we're going to get giddy about how they dovetail, how they see space, how they can play when the game breaks up, and they can be really spontaneous. But their nuts and bolts are fantastic, aren't they? 2 excellent distributors, 2 excellent kickers, and for all the sort of funky stuff, expansive stuff we've seen from the Lions, they are going to have to be very good at those things.
Now, we just got a little bit of an update from, little bits and pieces coming in. We'll speak to Gavin Mairs, who's out there in Canberra, and just what we're getting back from, and this is going to be no surprise to anyone, but we've not gotten a full-on line on Blair Kinghorn's health at the moment, so they think that, being told it's a precaution that he came off, and they'll assess and we'll see where it is. Now, this might date a bit, but if we're looking at the crystal ball and Kinghorn is out injured, and this is a serious thing, from a coach's position, what the hell do you do? Suddenly there's so much pressure on Keenan, right?
Yeah. I think you'd go, Immediately, you'd go Keenan, and you'd probably want Marcus Smith in the 22 to just give you a little bit more in the 22 jersey, or 23 if they go 6-2, to give you that little bit more cover. Tommy Freeman's played the majority of Champions Cup final at 15, 78 minutes or whatever it was after George Furbank's injury this season. So they do have more cover there. I keep blowing the horn for Matt Canson to have a go at 15, but he was cruelly sort of overlooked today in favour of Marcus Smith. But you're right, it does make a problematic position. I don't know whether it's problematic position, because you have the depth of class of those two, Keenan and Kinghorn, with Daly having been so good before his injury. But it's certainly a headache, put it that way.
Well, the other interesting headache, sorry to jump in here, but the other interesting headache is the fact that, well, when Daly went down, Owen Farrell was called up, a man who we've been told over and over again is a 12/10. So offers you nothing there at fullback if Kinghorn is injured. If they do, and obviously we don't know what the situation is right now, but if they do have to bring in a replacement for Kinghorn, what do you do? Do you go for someone who's a dyed-in-the-wool test 15 out and out, or do you go for a utility player? But I'm thinking here because there's a guy in Argentina that is an out-and-out 15 that might be in with a good shout, or there's a guy who will be playing against Fiji with Scotland who is more of a utility player that could come in.
Yeah, I would say that if we're talking about Tom Jordan and Freddie Stewart there, I would say Freddie Stewart more likely at this stage, just because you'd back him to come in and do a job with 15 being his, his absolute role within the side. It was quite interesting that Kinghorn was the primary chaser for restarts. That's something I would imagine that Tommy Freeman will be able to take up quite easily. He's done that a lot for England. But yeah, you're right. I think we're getting on in the tour now as well. And as I say, they've still got Keenan. They've still got these utility options at 15, as they have hinted at. And they hinted at that being the reason that Owen Farrell, that they didn't go for 15 when they brought in Owen Farrell. So they have probably more time than we think, both to figure out how fit Kinghorn is, or otherwise, or to figure out a replacement.
Obviously, Gav has a bit more detail on that. Can we look at the back row quickly?
Please.
Tom, you and I have spoken about this an awful lot, and it's been 6 that we've been talking about, but actually, let's add another digit on that and let's make it a 7. What did you make of Curry's performance here? And what do you think it says for those guys who everyone was saying, well, Van der Fleer looks like a test 7 for the Lions. We've had some great performances from Jack Morgan. Did you think any arguments were settled here?
No, absolutely not. And that's kind of, at this stage of the tour, you want arguments to be settled, don't you? I don't think it was quite settled at 12. Bundyaki, as we said, blew hot and cold. Don't think it was quite settled at tight head. And I think 7 was another one of those positions. Tom Curry, I thought he was quite busy. I thought he was pretty good, busy, bustling around. And then he made a couple of errors either side of half time. But sandwiching a lovely burst and offload for Marcus Smith. What he has on his side, Tom Curry, and what will not be spoken about a lot, I don't think, is how he's come on as a line-out forward, and that's important if he's wanted at 6. It's also important if Maratoji and Ollie Chessum are going to be in the pack, because there's just that cohesion there. What was quite interesting, and what is quite important to flag, I think, if we're talking about the balance of the back 5, is that so this was the first outing Chessum has had as a starting sit since, as this is something we've highlighted, since Toulouse absolutely battered Leicester Tigers. This is the second start he's had this season at 6. And what I thought was quite interesting was he was pretty eye-catching throughout, Chessum, and pretty good, but I thought he probably looked most comfortable moving back to lock when Curry and when Van der Fleer and Pollock came on, and those two have been earmarked. I'm fairly sure they've been earmarked as two players that complement each other quite well. So there was no accident that those two were on the bench together. But what it says to me is that Farrell has got to figure out this balancing the back 5 thing is something that the Lions can really shake up over 80 minutes. So they can start with, they've got the hybrid guys that they can start one of Byrne or Chessum at 6, or they can start with them at lock, but they can move that around depending on how they see the game sort of shaping up over 80 minutes. And today it was McCarthy and Curry they brought off for Pollock and Van der Fleer, and immediately that changes the sort of assets that you have within that back five.
Okay. Should we do our regular up and down segment, Charlie? I was generally going to say who's the leader in Mickey's clubhouse, but I think well, I've done it now. I've done it. Who's up for you at the moment?
Chessum has just mentioned Gary Ringrose, though, for me just looked really classy on the ball, and he's kind of and this is where it I guess as lay people what we are doing is thinking, right, the 12 and 13 has to be either Aki or Ringrose or Tuipulotu or Jones. But I think that almost Ringrose has sort of made himself pretty close to nailed on 13, and then that leaves the debate at 12 and whether you go with existing sort of island cohesion or you try and find a combination with Tuipulotu that has a higher season, and has high ceiling, and that is not to say that Hugh Jones hasn't been excellent on this tour. I think he has done with the opportunities that he's had. One thing maybe to watch with Ringrose is just how much he absolutely loves shooting in defence, and how that makes it absolutely important that the wing, whoever's sort of on his side is sort of in tune with that. And we saw with one of the Brumbies tries today from just the first phase one they scored off the scrum. Freeman was left a little bit flat-footed in Ringrose's wake, wasn't he? So that's a really big debate. It's almost as though every positive has sort of got a knock-on effect that you're thinking, oh geez, how else does the rest of this how does the rest of this side sort of measure up after that? But no, Ringrose and Chessum for me, really impressed.
Okay, and who's slipped down a little bit?
Well, I just go back maybe to those positions that remain uncertain. You can maybe I'm not sure whether I said tight head at the time, but still feels open for me at tight head. I don't think anybody's grasped it there. I don't think anybody's grasped it at 12. And you're right to mention Jack Morgan coming on strong at 7. Might have also been a strong day for the sort of 6-2 bench, given the energy that the Lions got from sort of unleashing those fresh back rowers. But yeah, all still quite up in the air for a game that we thought was a real dry run for the tests.
Yeah, so for me, I actually think that 2 senior players really stood out. I thought Maro Itoje was fantastic once again. I thought really good leadership performance from him. I'll tell you what, Dan Sheehan,
yeah,
he's already captained the Lions for a game on this tour, but as a willing deputy to Maro Itoje, he really stepped up. I mean, he was phenomenal in this game. Yeah, go on.
With Sheehan in mind, I'm going to just mention one play. So when you've got a team that kicks a lot off 9, what that gives you is opportunities to run from your own 22. And we saw that with Kinghorn and Finn Russell working as a 10-15 sort of pendulum and opening up the field. And that's where Sheehan's run from his own 22 comes from, and that's
having a monster handoff helps as well.
Awesome, but that's a hint of how the Lions can open stuff up, and that was really exciting.
It was quite Dane Colsey, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I thought he was real good. I want to underline the points that you made about Ringrose. I think defensively he's just really good at making those stopping chop tackles around the knee region that just stop plays dead. He's really good at spotting those in line and going for them. The other thing which I think is probably a bit underrated is you mentioned the centre partnerships there, and obviously there's a lot of talk about Russell and his relationship with Tuipulotu and Jones and how they all have a nice unity. Well, the thing is I think there's a really good understanding that's developing between Finn Russell and Gary Ringrose. There was a moment in one of the earlier games where they were sitting beside each other watching the Lions play, and it looked like they were chewing each other's ears off. It looks like they were really learning a lot from each other. Coming off at halftime, you could spot them chatting to each other. It seems like they're really knitting together quite well, and I think that's something that we might see go through this test series, fitness provided. In terms of who's potentially kicking themselves after that game, I think what Curry does well is exceptional, and he'll give you that surging run from a couple meters when you're attacking their line that's really good and really helpful, and he's got underrated hands as well. He's able to just put that tip on pass. However, he's a guy that's very hard on himself for some of the stuff he does, and I know that he'll be kicking himself after that period. I think it was just after halftime where he threw an intercept And then a couple phases later, he came in, Marsley from the side, wrapped someone up, and there was a penalty given out. It might not have been for him, but he'll probably be hard on himself for that. And it's those kind of things where you're talking about compounding error on error that are the kind of things that will probably be a little black mark against him. And to be honest, we're getting so close to test matches now that those things should count for something, especially when you've got the performances of Van der Fleer and Jack Morgan behind him. So there's plenty to come from that. In terms of front row stuff, I disagree with you slightly on Furlong. I think he has been, I was questioning his form coming into this. However, I think that actually just the bankability on him, as Ronan O'Gara, I believe, was saying after the match, that he started talking about his form, and it's like, can you develop form in a couple of games? Well, with someone with his experience, potentially, and I'll tell you what, the Lions will certainly be hoping he can, because the stature that he can bring, that's the kind of leadership you need on the field. Okay. Charlie Morgan, thank you very much for taking the time to join us from France. Make sure you've got the sun cream on, buddy. Next, we're going to get into a bit of a chat about what's happening over in Australia.
Good choices lead to great moments. Like when a clever dummy pass leads your team over the try line to victory. Making a savvy move and finding the insurance for you can feel like a win. Go.compare can help you take control of your financial decision-making. Get quotes in minutes and switch to more satisfying cover with confidence. It's your safety net. Sorted. Rugby teams don't run the same moves week in, week out, so you shouldn't just let your insurance auto-renew out of habit. Explore your options and see if you can score an even better deal. Go.compare is powering the Telegraph Rugby Podcast this summer and empowering you to make savvy decisions when it comes to your finances.
Well, technological marvels never cease. We are joined from Canberra by Gavin Mairs. And Gavin, before we get into anything else, do you have an update for us at all on Blair Kinghorn?
Nothing definitive, Al. We just come from an Andy Farrell press conference, and he just said he's being treated. It's definitely an knee injury, but we are waiting further updates. I think he probably will go for a scan. But it's, at this stage and given the fact that they took him off, it's obviously a big concern.
If we look at the positives of the Lions, it's another win on their scorecard. They have rolled out the majority of what you feel will be the test side. But do you think that the Lions after that one will be debriefing and going, yeah, happy with that first outing for what looks like a strong side for us?
I think we've seen another mixed bag from the Lions today. Some very good bits. They look a very powerful side. And, if I take anything from this performance, I think Andy Farrell wants to pick a team that can dominate the Wallabies physically. But at the same time, it's still lacking that cohesion. There's still too many errors. There's still too many try-scoring opportunities that are going by the wayside. I think they might have got into 22 over 20 times. And there's just not that conversion rate that Andy Farrell will be hoping from this side. And again, look at a couple of issues. The breakdown again, not efficient. Too many turnovers, penalties conceded, and just unconvincing when you feel the Lions should be building a big score. And, we saw, I don't know whether he got it on the TV back home, but at one stage, the big screen showed Joe Schmidt in the stand, and he had a big smile on his face. And one of the questions at the end of the press conference tonight was, how much is Andy Farrell, how much are you holding back in terms of how you're trying to play the game? And he said, as much as Joe Schmidt is. So these two are playing cat and mouse with each other. And again, interestingly, Al, I think there are still a number of questions yet to be answered. And it makes Saturday's game now more intriguing than it might have been, because this was not a test side performance.
Yeah, that intrigue certainly is ramped up a little bit. There was already a lot of interest around a certain Owen Farrell potentially playing for the Lions. Now there'll be a lot of eyes on Keenan and how he performs at 15, given that he had his troubles in the last outing. I'm glad you mentioned Joe Schmidt as well, because Charlie and I just had a chat about that and how he had a big old grin painted on him. Good to see that the mind games are starting. I'd like to see an awful lot more of that. And actually, there was probably some concerns the fact that this match went head-to-head with the deciding match of State of Origin and how much the Australian public are invested in this. So actually, I'd like some more of those mind games to be put out there so that the Australian public can buy in a lot more. You mentioned there, Gav, the issues with discipline and the issues with retaining ball, and how much that, because the big thing that will be, however much you're holding back, is you still don't want to be holding back in defence. And the fact that they conceded so many tries to this Brumbies team, is that the biggest single concern, actually, injuries aside?
I think that's right, Al. And we're looking at it. You know, we're piecing together a team on the run, and I think at this point Andy Farrell would have hoped that we'd have been a bit more convincing in that sense of defensive cohesion, and also just being ruthless at the breakdown. You know, you look at the side they're putting out there, you look at that back row, they should be dominating the breakdown. It just didn't happen. And I think there are interpretations, like refereeing interpretations here, and how the Brumbies played tonight. In some ways, I think Andy Farrell will look at this and go, another good workout for his team. Like they're asking questions once again, and you know, everyone knows in the camp that this is not good enough and there needs to be a step up. The big unanswered question is it coming? And we had in the mix zone tonight Tag Furlong, who's not known to mince his words, and he said, it's coming, don't worry, it's coming. And I think when the sea of red of supporters arrive in Brisbane next week, they will be hoping that those words ring true.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gavin Mairs pulling out all the stops from the other side of the world. Thanks very much for dropping by, and we'll see you again on Saturday. Well, that's it for another episode of the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. Bit of a mixed bag. Thank you to everybody from joining us from all the corners of the globe, even those that have been hanging out with Mickey Mouse. If you've got chance, catch up with all our coverage on Telegraph Sport. We've also got some fantastic stuff. Brian Moore's done a really great column on what the hell is happening with Marcus Smith. That suddenly takes on an extra element of intrigue after today's game. And we've got a phenomenal piece for those that are missing Charles Richardson. You can catch up with him doing a piece with Wayne Barnes on re-refereeing the famous Battle of Ballymore in 1989. If you're a bit squeamish, you'd better look away, but it's phenomenal stuff. We'll be back on Saturday with the latest instalment when the Lions face an invitational side out in Adelaide. And apart from that, thank you very much for listening.
Go.compare, proud supporters of the Welsh Rugby Union, is the go-to comparison service for savvy savers. We're delighted to power the Telegraph Rugby Podcast this summer and help listeners make good calls on their insurance, energy, and more. When things get tough, Go.compare has got your back. Get quotes from dozens of insurance providers and compare cover to make sure you're getting the right deal for you. Start your search for satisfying insurance at Go.compare.